It was unplugged. And
Okay. Now,
I asked you before whether we were in the last week of Liszt.
The last week of Liszt. It's about time to move on. I think that we have shown what we've wanted to. I have heard pieces by Liszt that I've never heard and always wanted to. And we'll be crowding in the next 4 or 5 days still some major Liszt pieces, such as the Valet Dobermann, the third Mephisto Waltz, the Dante Sonata, and not least his masterpiece, perhaps the greatest work he ever wrote, the Sonata in B minor, besides some little works.
You've mentioned 2 works that have sort of a demonic aspect to them, of course, the Mephisto Waltz and the Dante Sonata.
Yes. This third Mephisto Waltz is a work of 1883, making Liszt 72, and he's back to his ardent self in this work. As you've noticed, some of the late pieces have had inconclusive aspects and some strangeness. Yet here he's writing a full-scale piece again and coming back to that constant dialogue he had with this diabolical strain, which was certainly in the literature, certainly in the artistic air, so to speak, of the 19th century, as nature worship was. And let's begin with this very ardent tone poem, the third Mephisto Waltz, John Ogdon, the pianist. one of the great works of Liszt's old age, the Mephisto Waltz, number 3. John Ogdon played it very well.
I quite agree. He's a remarkable pianist, and of course we've talked about him before. But talking about the Mephisto Waltz, there is this thing, this almost love affair with the devil that that Liszt has had through his entire life. And
Kentner said he feared God but loved the devil. Yeah, and of course there's a certain ironic, tongue-in-cheek quality to his satanic worshippings.
It's almost mocking. It's a daring sort of thing.
Yes, it's daring. How did you like the striking opening to this piece? Scriabin would again take up the cudgel of this kind of erotic, diabolical feeling in such works as the Ninth Sonata, which is called the Black Mass, and the many of his other works. Yeah.
You said that this was generally the zeitgeist of the time, the thought of many composers. What other works come to your mind as
well, mostly in literature.
Oh, in literature.
Yes, Liszt was the greatest to stylize this thing in music, but literature. Goethe's Faust, of course, was an obsession with Liszt his whole life. He never read it until he met Berlioz, one of the major relationships of his life, the other being the relationship with Chopin, and the knowledge that Paganini existed. He didn't know him personally, but heard his Paris recitals, and that was the beginning, really, on the violin, so to speak, of the pianistic world of Liszt. Both in the showbiz aspects, Paganini would come through a trap door with everything dark except the candlelight around him, an orchestra behind him, and cadaverous looking. And Liszt didn't go that far, but Liszt made some extraordinary ventures into show business, such as if he began the Weber Concertstück's last movement too fast, well, he'd faint away. And
just to avoid having to play it and get himself out of that mess.
It was more than that. It was the Paris of the 1830s. It almost demanded this hysteria.
But that's coming back. I mean, I think of Virgil Fox, for example. Although he's not pale-looking by any means, he's a very healthy man. He goes in tremendously for the dramatic and the colors and the lights and everything. And also, I think there are other pianists. Hollander, I think.
Yes, and today there's Peter Serkin, who has certain flair. Flair is a big thing, and Liszt had it. Where are we now? Oh, let's go to Liszt of the Soirée de Vienne. We've heard one of the series of 7 of these pieces that are dressed-up Schubert waltzes. And this is an interesting performance because it's by a very favorite pianist of mine who died in 1960, who was not at all in the West in his career, but who was a hero in the Soviet Union. His name, Alexander Sofronitsky, and he was Scriabin's son-in-law. And he is playing this Soirée de Vienne on Scriabin's own piano. So that's interesting. Let's hear it. Alexander Sofronitsky playing the Soirée de Vienne of Liszt. That's a set based on Schubert waltzes. You know, Schubert wrote about 400 little Ländler and waltzes, which were jotted down. He, in the evenings, his friends would gather and waltz and talk and sing his compositions and play them, and he would improvise these waltzes. Not being a very good dancer himself, he'd be content with playing these. Well, Liszt loved Schubert dearly and dressed them up in this set of pieces called Nights in Vienna. Interestingly enough, to me at least, the second half of the century just loved to transcribe for the piano Johann Strauss waltzes. Liszt never transcribed a Strauss waltz that I know of. I think it's very wise, because no matter how sparkling the piano dressings up are, even in Godowsky, there's something wrong, to me. But Schubert is ideal, especially these naive tunes. Well, that's enough on that, and it was interesting also because it was on Scriabin's piano that we heard Sofronitsky play.
Well, the sound was very bad. It was obviously something copied over from 78 years ago.
That's right, yes. But also the piano was very old. It's at Scriabin's home, which is now a museum in Moscow. Well, we have another work, but first I want to read this little passage from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it applies to certainly Liszt and his inner gleam. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. Why I read that this minute, I have no idea, but
it was inspired nonetheless.
The inner gleam. I think Liszt is an example of a man who followed his inner gleam. Let's hear a work which is one of Liszt's greatest, and it's called the Dante Sonata, and Liszt composed, writes Kentner, the first version of this work on the shores of Lake Como in 1837, about the time his daughter Cosima was born, and it concludes the second Italian volume of the Years of Pilgrimage, where it is the most extended piece in the entire collection. The Dante Sonata is a powerful evocation, not so much of the Dantesque world of hell, purgatory, and paradise, as of Liszt's impression of all this seen through the eyes of Victor Hugo. Liszt knew Dante's Divine Comedy, but the title After a Lecture of Dante is actually taken from one of Hugo's poems. If the vastness of Dante's conception is cut down to size, the size of a single piano, the sonorous Hugo rhetoric is nonetheless perfectly matched by Liszt's austere grandeur. The introduction abounds in far-reaching modulations, and the tritone with which the work opens, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here," lends itself admirably to the Lisztian technique of keeping us in suspense over the tonic key. And later the work continues with tremendous chromatic wailing. It's a work you will like or hate. The pianist Alfred Brendel. a stupendous performance of the Dante Sonata by Alfred Brendel. This playing had direction constantly in a piece that can fall apart so easily. That direction is what is one of the most important things in any playing, but especially in a work that structurally can fall apart at any moment. The Dante Sonata is very interesting pianistically in that it has no finger passages. It's all based on octaves and chords, and it's a tremendous physical strain. And after Matt does a few things, we'll be back to hear Gray Clouds. Mr. Mort Cass, who is a fine critic and who's been listening to these Liszt programs, writes to me, "The St. Francis Talking to the Birds was for me a unique musical experience that expressed a truly humble Liszt identifying with the saint. Liszt made me feel this. You know, Liszt tried hard to be truly religious. He went to daily mass, but it did not come naturally for him. What came easily for him was power. Amy Fay says that his power at the piano induced in her a state of delightful but debased submission. Robert Schumann called him a ruler and conqueror to whom fate for once had allotted, instead of a dangerous implements, guns for example, the peaceful ones of art. In short, Liszt is a Napoleon. He said he would like to be the leading diplomat of Europe, with the power to force submission from his audience. But, being a good man, not a Hitler, he does not rest easily with this power. In a sense, giving up concertizing, for the most part, at the height of his pianistic success, is an attempt to rid himself of this power. He yearns to submit himself to a higher principle, the Church. He practices extraordinary charity, gives of himself for free in the attempt to win that inner peace, that grace by doing good. But the inner conflict is never really resolved. It is not in his nature to submit. It is touching in his last stark works to see Liszt striving to divest himself of all those overpowering pianistic devices, of all that is superfluous, and find for himself the bare bones of truth. But for this he would have to submit to the god of form, as did Brahms, Chopin, Beethoven, and this was not in his nature." Very interesting words that I agree with about the late Liszt works from Mort Cass. Let's hear a work that was much admired by Debussy, and Stravinsky himself was astounded by it. It's a short piece, Nuages Gris, Gray Clouds, and again Liszt is looking toward the future. The performance, Jean-Rudolph Kars. Gray Clouds by Liszt, composed in 1881, and another performance of this mysterious little work by Louis Kentner, Hungarian-born pianist, 1905, who lives in England. Louis Kentner playing Gray Clouds by Liszt, and that concludes today's program. Probably 4 more programs on Liszt before we begin the series of comparative performances, movement by movement, of Beethoven's 32 piano sonatas. I thank you for listening and have a very good day.